wonderful to be here. I mean, the Web Summit just gets bigger and better each year. I'm Caroline Hyde from Bloomberg Television. Thank you all for being in the audience today to talk about changing the game with none other than John Petter, CEO of BT Consumer Division. Thank you for joining us. Give us a sense. I mean, we've got the biggest gathering of startups in the world right here, right now. What should the startups in the audience be thinking about how much actually BT invests their time, their interest, their money in these sorts of businesses?
Well, I think people think of BT as being this monolith, but really actually, firstly, we put huge emphasis on the research and development side. So we're the third biggest spender on R&D across the last 10 years in the UK. We spend about...
The third biggest?
Third biggest. We spend about £500 million a year on R&D, basically. And secondly, we do a lot of work with startups. So we have a sponsored startup space just by Silicon Roundabout. And we have a scouting team in the Valley. And we work with these sorts of firms a lot, actually, because we find they bring a lot of value to our company.
And the way they're bringing value is, we're talking about changing the game. You're experimenting a bit. I mean, you've actually made my job as a journalist far more interesting in terms of TMT space over the past couple of years, because you suddenly came in, ripped up the rule book, started plowing money into sports. And this was a really new venture for you. How is it working?
Well, we think of ourselves, especially on the sports side, very much as being a challenger, because the way the pay TV market works in the UK is there's one company that has 65% of the customers and about 80% of the revenues. And kind of we're big in broadband and we're a big firm overall, but we were relatively small in pay TV. So we decided that if we were going to get into this space, that we really had to do things differently.
And you had to get into the space because it's all about content, it's all about quad play now. The consumer wants all four things, please. They don't just want one TV provider, one phone provider, they want mobile TV, they want their broadband, and they want their fixed line.
Well, people like to deal with one company, that's true, and typically the firm that consumers engage most with on an emotional level would be the firm that's supplying them with content, that's true. There's another side to what we do, though, that because we believe in broadcasting over IP rather than through satellite or through cable, which are kind of 1980s broadcasting techniques, as we would describe them, we can do more interesting broadcasting, more interactive in 4K, and sport is perfect for that, because sport is real-time, and you have to have it, and you can make the experience richer as well. So sport was therefore the right thing for us to invest in.
Is it working as you'd envisaged? Are you starting to see consumers coming out of, you hinted at one particular player, 65% of the market about in pay TV, you're talking about Sky. Are you seeing people coming towards your content?
I mean, there are big challenges, that's true, but the results for our business we're really pleased with, because the history of the consumer division has been a history whereby we've managed to grow our profits really through managing our costs historically, and our revenue and the size of our business has decreased. Until 2 years ago, we really undertook this new venture in sport and content, and since then the business has changed direction, and we've grown our revenue very strongly since. I mean, we're a big business anyway, £4 billion turnover. Just this part of BT, the consumer business, is £4 billion in turnover. More than £1 billion in profit, but we're growing pretty quickly too. So we've just released our quarterly earnings last Thursday, and our revenue growth was about 7%, which for a business of that size really is pretty fast.
So you're growing in terms of revenue, you're managing to woo over more users. What needs to be changed to perhaps, in your mind's eye, level a playing field? We're not only hearing from your side of the argument that pay TV is perhaps too much in the hands of one player, and therefore we've got a challenger such as yourself coming in with sports content. But equally, on the other side of the argument, we also hear from the likes of Sky, but also Vodafone, worrying about your control of Openreach and the broadband infrastructure. How are you reacting to that, and what are we hearing the conversation going forward?
Sure. I mean, we think the UK has a good story right now, because the UK has pretty much the fastest speeds, the lowest prices, the best take-up of any of the big countries in Europe in terms of fast broadband, super fast broadband. And it reaches about 85% of UK homes for the BT network right now. And this is a network that's open and available to all of our competitors. So we think on broadband there is a good story there in terms of competition. And the UK has very, very vibrant competition on broadband. But on pay TV, the regulator doesn't have the powers to regulate on pay TV. And they haven't really intervened. So kind of the content is really all owned by one company, which is Sky. And several people have taken them on in the past. They've all gone out of business. We're a much larger company. Clearly, we're going to be around for the long term. But even we have found major barriers getting into this business. And we think it does need shaking up.
So what would make the barriers lower for you to be able to supply yet more content? What needs to change?
Well, for example, the BT has to supply our fibre network to all of our competitors, and we do it on fair and equivalent terms. So the consumer business pays the same price, the BT business pays the same price that Sky do, that TalkTalk do, that all the firms pay, and we get it supplied on the same terms. It's fair and equivalent and equal. But Sky refuses to supply us some of their content at all. They just say they won't do it, basically. And we think, given that they're dominant and given their size, they should have some obligations to supply on fair terms. No one's saying they shouldn't make money from this, but they shouldn't be able just to kind of lock these things down and prevent access. You know, that's just frustrating competition.
But even though you've managed to get locked down on the Champions League, for example?
Well, we do have the Champions League, and we have the Champions League exclusively, and they're a brilliant set of rights. But if you compare the rights that we have and the rights that Sky have, well, I'm really pleased with our channel. I think our channel is great. I think that we're the innovator, but they have so many more rights than we do, and they also have just far more size than we have, that they are still dominant by any measure.
What are you finding the consumer wants most then when they're looking at content? You're head of the consumer division. Is it now about movies? Is it about new content, the likes that Netflix and Amazon are producing of their own, the new creativity? What are people telling you as BT?
Well, when people make household purchasing decisions, they typically look for a complete household solution. So just being strong in one area means it's harder to win people over, because you might be strong in sports, but the consumer says someone else in the family wants movies, or someone else wants premium drama. And again, this reinforces why someone like Sky has such a strong position, because they're dominant in all of these areas, therefore, and there is almost like a contingent value in them, whereas we're strong in sports, but we're less strong in these other content areas right now. Again, that says that we need a change in regulation to shake the market up, frankly, because the UK, even some of the big global players like Netflix, if you look what Netflix has in the UK versus what Netflix has in the US, the proposition in the US is much stronger, arguably, because a firm like Netflix has much greater access in the US than they do in the UK because of Sky's dominance.
You didn't wait for regulation when it came into sport, though. You just went in and you made a big bet. Could you make a big bet on movies, on your own content as well?
Well, I think if you just wait for regulation, the risk is that you can grow old waiting. And we had tried very, very hard on regulation, but we thought, actually, we're a big company. We can take risks, some risks. And we did make a big bet, as you say, actually. And I think that we had very much a strong feeling for how we wanted to do this, because if I think back to my childhood, sport was very much a national conversation, and everyone would speak about it. So on the FA Cup final day, for example, the most memorable day of my childhood, I think, is when the team I support, which is West Ham, won the FA Cup, and my favourite player, Trevor Brookings, scored the winning goal with his head, which he never used. And that was like the day of my childhood. And since so much of sport has gone on to pay, the national conversation really shrank a bit. And you saw this changing around the Olympics in 2012 in the UK, because suddenly it was all on free-to-air and everyone was talking about sport. So when we got into sport, we really saw a business opportunity to find a way to do sport differently. And we set out with the goal of giving sport back to the people. So we decided, therefore, that the style of our presenters, that they wouldn't wear suits and ties and be like sitting behind desks, but that they would they would be expert in their sport, but they would be, they could make jokes, there would be a mixture of men and women, and it would just be much more inclusive, basically. And so we've tried to do things in that way, and that comes through in our business model, because what we've done is we've given our sports channels away for free for customers that buy our broadband. It's much stronger, arguably, because a firm like Netflix has much greater access in the US than they do in the UK because of Sky's dominance.
You didn't wait for regulation when it came into sport, though. You just went in and you made a big bet. Could you make a big bet on movies, on your own content as well?
Well, I think if you just wait for regulation, the risk is that you can grow old waiting. And we had tried very, very hard on regulation, but we thought, actually, we're a big company. We can take risks, some risks. And we did make a big bet, as you say, actually. And I think that we had very much a strong feeling for how we wanted to do this, because if I think back to my childhood, sport was very much a national conversation, and everyone would speak about it. So on the FA Cup final day, for example, the most memorable day of my childhood, I think, is when the team I support, which is West Ham, won the FA Cup, and my favourite player, Trevor Brookings, scored the winning goal with his head, which he never used. And that was like the day of my childhood. And since so much of sport has gone on to pay, the national conversation really shrank a bit. And you saw this changing around the Olympics in 2012 in the UK, because suddenly it was all on free-to-air, and everyone was talking about sport. So when we got into sport, we really saw a business opportunity to find a way to do sport differently. And we set out with the goal of giving sport back to the people. So we decided, therefore, that the style of our presenters, that they wouldn't wear suits and ties and be like sitting behind desks, but that they would they would be expert in their sport, but they would be, they could make jokes, there would be a mixture of men and women, and it would just be much more inclusive, basically. And so we've tried to do things in that way, and that comes through in our business model, because what we've done is we've given our sports channels away for free for customers that buy our broadband. And by contrast, the main competitor, Sky, for customers that buy their sports channels, they're paying £60, £70 a month. So there's just a completely different approach, really. I think that's made people see our company differently. They're seeing us as the challenger in this business.
The challenger. I mean, interestingly, of course, you say you're actually a consumer yourself of your own OpenReach, of your own infrastructure. Many people feel that perhaps the quality isn't quite as they'd like, or indeed the investment hasn't been quite as they'd like. What would you say in response to that? Do you feel, as a consumer of your own OpenReach, that you think it is good enough?
I think they do a great job. I mean, things could always be better, and there are always things you want to improve, and I know the team are working really hard on it. But I have to say, if you go to other countries and you look at the infrastructure that they have, and then you come back to the UK, and actually, the speeds in the UK have massively increased in the last 10 years. The prices have come down because there is very vibrant competition. And the UK does have a very good story, in my view. And BT announced recently that the company has the appetite to go again on investing in infrastructure. So we made the investment in superfast broadband, and most people now have access to superfast broadband. We're going to go again, and through OpenReach, we're going to invest in ultra-fast broadband too, which is speeds of 300 to 500 megabits. And we've announced that in the next 5 or so years, we're going to give 10 million people access to ultra-fast broadband as well. So the strategy here is to invest before people think they need the network, basically. That's the only way this thing works. If you can get ahead of things, get ahead of the consumers, make the big investments.
Okay, so I'm hearing that, look, you're always working to try and up the quality of the infrastructure. You're already trying to foresee a utopia where you can produce yet more content and make it more accessible. You've already started throwing your weight behind it on the sports element. What then can the audience do? What can the startups that are here do in terms of embracing some of the infrastructure that you're promising? What areas are you looking to build up, use your £500 million of R&D spending to actually start to improve your own internal use?
Well, I think there are so many opportunities and so many areas that BT is interested in working with startups in. I mean, for a start, I think the notion of interactive broadcasting and people consuming content differently is a massively interesting area. So kind of historically people would just passively sit and receive something that would get broadcast over satellite or cable. We see our consumers are consuming differently now because they've got more than one device, first of all, and we see they're engaging with their TV differently as well. And recently, we just launched the first 4K channel in Europe, basically. And we're the first 4K broadcaster in Europe.
What does 4K really do? I mean, does it make that much difference when you're watching a game?
Actually, it makes a massive difference because it makes you feel like you're there. In fact, in some ways, it can be actually better than if you're there. Recently, I was at a basketball game in the O2, and we had like a box, and there was beers, and it was all very nice, and there was like a balcony, and you could go and stand on the balcony and watch the game. And inside the box, there was a 4K screen, massive screen. Over the course of the game, everyone started on the balcony, but they came inside, and they were actually watching it on the screen, and they were watching it on the screen because the view was a bit like that FIFA soccer view of the whole court, effectively. And in some ways, arguably, you got a better experience. So 4K just makes you feel like you're there, actually. The picture quality is so vivid, and sport is the content type that really makes you see the difference, actually, more than any other content, I think.
So you want content to be used more interactively, you want startups to be able to embrace the new HD and 4K specifications that we can watch on. What other areas do you think are the future? Thinking, you're making big bets, you've got to think 2, 5, 10 years out.
Yes.
How are we going to be consuming sport, but all the other content going forward? And what can app developers, software developers, designers be looking at to help you right now?
Well, I think we'll consume it over multiple devices, first of all. So I'm pleased to say that BT's deal for the purchase of EE, the mobile company, got provisional approval from the regulator last week, which is a big step for us. And it brings together EE's 4G network and BT's fiber network. And we think this is very much the way consumers are going to consume content. And they're going to expect a complementary experience on their mobile phone to what they're getting on their TV set-top box. And they're going to want to have an experience that covers the whole of their home as well. So we think this unlocks a whole set of new opportunities for innovators and for investors, because there are big problems still to solve in terms of connectivity inside the home, for allowing people to consume content simultaneously inside the home, for allowing them to personalize it and engage in it in different ways. These are all great opportunities for startups, and startups have the energy and the passion to really drive change, I believe.
Energy, passion, but not every startup sat here is based in Silicon Valley or indeed in Silicon Roundabout in London. I mean, there are so many amazing, vibrant tech hubs at the moment.
Yeah.
How do I, as a startup founder or business development officer, find a way to get to you? How do I access BT? How do I show off my wares?
Well, we have this scouting team, and they are really, really good, I would say. So I will find a way to broadcast out their details. I'll talk to the organisers, and we'll find a way to do that. And they meet hundreds of companies, basically, and they also help because they know that this is a community and an ecosystem, and then what goes around comes around. So they help, they give advice, they help make connections. We know that if we do that, and then the help ultimately comes around and comes back to us as well. So we're very, very keen to be part of the community, to be part of the ecosystem, to engage and become part of the conversation.
Can you give us an idea of perhaps your R&D spend versus other areas of TV, of content? I mean, are you finding that there's a bit of a war on talent when it's coming to wanting to invest in research and development in content providers?
Well, if you're investing in sports content, everything else seems cheap by comparison. That's one of the great things about it, really.
You've already splashed the billions of pounds.
Exactly. But we do make significant bets. I mean, we spend, as I mentioned, £500 million in R&D. We do a lot of venturing, a lot of collaborations, both in the UK, in Tel Aviv, and in Silicon Valley as well. So, but our guys work globally, and they're keen to talk to people and to meet them anywhere across the world as well. They're just looking for the best ideas, basically.
And what about the consumer? Are you going to go, how's your geographical base going to expand? Are you always going to be primarily a UK European company, or bigger ambitions?
For now, we're very happy in the UK. We think there's a lot of opportunity in the UK. And the UK is a really exciting market because there is such competition, and because I think UK consumers are amongst the world's most connected. They spend more online pretty much than anywhere else, and they love the internet, and so do we.
Tech savvy.
Absolutely.
The
Great.
appropriate place to be so. It's been wonderful speaking to you.
Thank you very much.
Audience, give it up for John Petter, BT CEO for the Consumer Division.
Great.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Great.